Sí, sí que funciona.
Este clip per nosaltres és molt fàcil. So I will switch to English, right? And just start welcoming you all to this fourth session of our Hard Trip FOCA Spring Open Seminar Sessions. Yeah, that, well, we decided to open, so we decided to invite some of our former group members to join our weekly group seminar and open the seminars to public. Yeah? And well, this is the fourth session we are organizing, and we are amazed to have so many people here. And I would say that it is not because us, because we are a small group and we did as much as we can, but when many people attend a lecture is because the presenter, not because the organizers. And this is basically clear. Yeah. So welcome you all again, and I'm really very happy to have Pere today that accepted our invitation to give a short talk about his present activities. So Pere studied in Tarragona. So actually with Pere we share many things. Yeah. So we are coming from the same village. This is very rare in the world, so big world, but from exactly the same village. Yeah. So we smell same things, and we felt, we have many common memories of our childhoodness, although 20 years difference. Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
20 or more than 20. Yeah, doesn't matter. Yeah. And then, well, Pere came to the ICIQ just at the very beginning. He did his PhD, and then I don't know. He will explain an absolutely incredible coincidence that exists in this our small scientific world. That is the main reason that he probably is the main reason that he is still in the States. So he went to the States for a postdoc. And then he came back for Europe, for Germany, for a second postdoc, but there was a very important reason in the States to come back to the States again. And this is why he is still there. He's building a very nice family. I am really proud of being as much as close I can. We are very far away from each other, but it's really nice to still share our lives. And today, Pere, I'm really very proud to welcome you to this seminar, and the screen is yours.
So let me share my screen. I think that works. Perfect. So thank you very much for your kind introduction. And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to present the things about like uranium and this. I mean, my wife and I published a paper on the same topic that was accepted to JAX the same day. Like it's a different paper, like two papers.
No. Was
submitted.
Was submitted.
Submitted. Sorry.
Submitted. Exactly.
Submitted. Yeah, it's true, because we usually discuss that hers was accepted earlier, but I always say that mine was better. But well, that's a nice thing, and it was a coincidence that then, of course, since my wife was in the US, I tried to come back, and we are in South Dakota because they offer us two positions, and that's like what is known as a two-body problem. That is very hard to solve because I mean having like two positions in a university is very hard. And today I want to talk a bit about what we are doing with machine learning. We entered this field 3 years ago, and today I'm going to present some kind of applications of machine learning into materials chemistry. And just to give you an outline, I mean, I'm not going to give all the details, but we published two papers in 2020, and these are going to be like the things that I'm going to be just showing you. And I'm not going to give you the full story, just some highlights. But the two papers were authored by Balaranjan Selvaranam. this is an experimentalist that did his master as an experimentalist, and then he decided that for his last 3 years he wanted to be shared and join my group to be doing both the theory and experiments with another like researcher. And when a graduate student knocks your door and tells you he wants to join your group and he's an experimentalist, but also tells you that he has 4 computers in his basement, and he has them like working together like a cluster, you should hire that guy. That guy was like one of my best students, was my first student. And right now he graduated last year and he's in the University of Alberta. But the main thing that he was working was in materials chemistry or material science. And what we did is develop the application of atom-centered symmetry functions to large chemical spaces using convolutional neural networks. That's the first paper that we published. And then we did the prediction of optoelectronic properties with copper oxide using neural network potentials. And the 2 keywords that are very important that you should like keep in mind, that my group is very interested, is like how to explore large chemical spaces. Like, for example, we are very interested on speciation, nucleation. But in this case, the tools that we are showing here for material science, my group is now using in other research projects. And the second thing that we are very interested is how we perform dynamics that have like high accuracy, that are not doing ab initio dynamics, that are like just based on neural network potentials. So let me introduce you a bit what kind of like functions we're using. So we are using these kind of like atom-centered symmetry functions that are nothing less than mathematical functions that describe the molecular properties as a sum of atomic contributions. And we'll see a few of them in a second. And this kind of approach works very well when your data set, like the molecules that you want to describe, have a small number of chemical elements. And we will see what's the reason behind that in a second. And what that means is if you have like between 3 to 4 or 5 different elements, you can use these functions to describe your chemical environment. And one of the applications or the way how they are used traditionally is these symmetry functions are stored for the different element combinations, and we'll see that in a second, but they're usually stored in a vector that is usually called the atomic environment vector. And all of this will make a bit more of sense when I introduce the ones that we've been using for the last 3 years. We have decided to go with the Bell-Parinello symmetry functions. They are just only one type. And if you remember your calculus, this is nothing else. Let me just select my pointer. These are nothing else than Gaussian functions. And these Gaussian functions depend on 2 centers. So you have the radial functions that depend on 2 centers. And then you have the angular functions that depend on 3 centers. And if we visualize how they look like, they are nothing else than different Gaussian functions with different like width and center at different positions in the case of the angular ones. But what these functions do is capture the chemical environment around the different atoms. If we visualize one of them, and that's the easiest way to put them like how they look like, it's nothing else than a vector, and this is the vector for the carbon atom. So if you are in this carbon atom, what we did is put one Gaussian function in this case, and what we do is we find this peak corresponds to this hydrogen, then we find that there is no carbon-carbon interactions. So these ones are pairwise. So we have like doing carbon with hydrogen, carbon with carbon, carbon with oxygen, and then we do all the angles. So the nice thing about this vector is that if we make any change in the geometry, for example, here we are changing the dihedral of this formic acid, it changes the vector. So you have a fingerprint of your molecule, so you can encode your structure into a vector form, and that is invariant actually. And then you can use that to try to just build your neural network. So because using Cartesian coordinates or using like geometries as they are not a good approach, because this approach is completely invariant. Then what we do, and the traditional approach, is to use these vectors as inputs for a neural network. And a neural network just has this kind of like, you have these inputs, you have the nodes, and then you have certain hidden layers and the output. And usually what happens here is we are feeding in this vector. We have some hidden layers that have some weight, And at the end, what we obtain is the energy contribution of each atom to the total energy. So what we do at the end is just we feed in, we transform our geometry into a vector, we feed it into the neural network, and we obtain an energy. And we train this neural network with a test set. So one of the problems of this approach that is well known is that the number of functions that you need, it increases with the number of elements. So if you, for example, decide to include 4 radial functions and 8 angular functions per atom, if you decide to study alkanes and you have 2 different elements, you will need a total of 32 symmetry functions. However, as soon as you want to study all the elements or include all the elements up to argon, you need around 1,500. And if you want to include the whole periodic table, you require around 56,000. So if you want to study big, like chemical spaces that contain a lot of chemical elements, you require a huge amount of symmetry functions, and this is a huge problem. And the other thing that happens is you are working in a vector. So this vector has a certain length. And every time that, let's assume that you feed your model, your neural network for alkanes, and suddenly you say, well, I want to include also some molecules in my study that contain nitrogen. Your vector only contains interactions between carbon, hydrogen, carbon, carbon, hydrogen, carbon, and then all the angular ones. But when you add the nitrogen, your vector changes the length, and then you have to restart from scratch your training, and it's not what is called a universal descriptor. So what we realize is like, well, if you look at any kind of generic like math textbook, it tells you, well, you can work with a scalar, you can have a vector, and if you think about what I introduced before, it's a vector. But one of the options is to say, well, if you think about the periodic table, my periodic table could be seen as a matrix that is 7 by 32, I think. And what you can think about is like, well, why if we structure our vectors in a way that we include all the possible combinations, that we create we define a periodic table tensor descriptor. So what we did is exactly that. So instead of using a vector, we decided to say, well, I'm going to use the periodic table descriptor. We are going to have a matrix that is 7 by 32. And in each one of the positions, what we have is the interaction of that element with the rest, with all the possible combinations. What that gives you is a gigantic like tensor that is actually like 7, 32, and 118. But the advantage of doing that is you already have, your descriptor has all the possible chemical elements. So if you want to study carbon and hydrogen, you just have carbon and hydrogen like contributions to your neural network, and all the rest are all 0. However, if you want to include them later, you just have to turn them on. And this is nothing else like a trick to, instead of having vectors, you stack them in a different way, and what you have is a tensor. So now, one of the problems of doing that, and I will start to show results in a second, is that then you still require a huge amount of weights. So you will have to do a neural network, and you have a descriptor, that is this periodic table descriptor, that will require to optimize many weights to get your neural network like trained. So, but if you think about this kind of approach, this kind of like image over here looks like actually a picture with layers. So what you can do is, it has been done like many times in the case of images. You can see this little cat, and we assume that is like 5 pixels by 5 pixels and 3 layers, and the 3 layers are the different colors, red, green, and blue. And we can just separate them. And this is exactly what we have in this rank tensor. So we have many periodic tables stacked from left to right. And what we can do is the same approach that we have done in images to compress images. That is, apply a convolution. And this is a mathematical tool that what it's going to do is it's going to transform our neural network into a convolutional neural network. And what that means is we are going to grab our data, for example, in this matrix as an example, and we're going to apply a filter. And at the end, if you grab and you say, okay, if the product and the sum of the filter and the original image give you 7, -7. And that's mainly because you multiply this filter by this square over here, and you sum all the elements. So what you are doing is compressing the information. So to finish, and this is just the introduction to this descriptor that we developed. What we did is nothing else than construct a radial tensor that includes all possible combinations and is shaped as a periodic table in layers. We did the same with the angular tensor, and the angular tensors, since it's 3 center interactions, there is more of them. And what we did is we applied like some convolutional, like we applied a convolutional neural network approach. So what we did is we compress our data down 2 times, and then we combine it all together, like the radial and the angular tensor. And this transformation is always applied in all our data. And then we realized that if we use the raw data that we had here, we were overfitting. And this is a problem when you have like huge data sets. And what we did is we drop out, so we remove some of the nodes during our training. So now what we did with this, like how we prove that this is useful for something. So what we did is we took all the like structures from the materials database. So these are materials. And we kicked out any material that has like less than 10 occurrences for a chemical element. That means that anything that has neon or argon, we just kicked out. And what we have at the end is around 67,000 structures of materials. And they are 85 chemical elements. And also, just to test also things, we use the QM9 database, these organic molecules. And we also kick any molecule that has combinations that are very rare. That, for example, any molecule that only has carbon and nitrogen. This occurs less than 10 times, so we just don't include it in our study. And in this case, we only have 5 chemical elements, but we have 130,000 like molecules. And we divided everything in 80% randomly, 80% for the training of our model, 10% on is going to be for evaluation, and 10% for the test. So we train our neural network using the periodic table descriptor, and we apply this convolutional neural network approach. And what we can do is, like, if we grab all those like materials, we are able to fit a neural network, a convolutional neural network that is describing 85 elements, and the error in the prediction of the energy is just 94 millielectron volts per atom. If you compare that with the literature, there is better universal like descriptors. However, this was the one that we published, so we keep like, if we keep the training for like a couple of months more, we are able to get that down to half of it. And the same happens with the QM9. The QM9, we get a mean average error of 2.2. So that means that using this approach for the periodic table descriptor with a convolutional neural network, we are able to predict the energies of materials that have never been seen by the model with an accuracy of 94 millielectron volts per atom, and in the case of molecules, 2.2 kcals per mole. And again, if we keep the training for a couple of months more, we are able to get into chemical accuracy. It's also pretty obvious from these plots that we get a way better prediction in the case of QM9 than in the case of materials dataset. And that's mainly because we only have 5 elements in the case of QM9, and we have like 85 elements in the case of materials dataset. The other thing that we were worried is like, well, where these errors come from. And if we check that in both cases, and I'm going to show the QM9, that is the organic molecules, we saw that 37% of our error of our systems are predicted with an error of less than 1 kcal, and 74% have an error of less than 3 kcals. And then there is few of them, like for example, like 1% of the data has more than 10 kcals. And we try to check if there was any chemical like reason, but the molecules that are like poorly predicted are completely at random. So there is no reason why those are like not predicted properly. But the nice thing is, if we have 74% of the energies are predicted with less than 3 kcals per mole of error, we can use this approach to explore and try to just do some kind of a screening of structures. It's not to be like obtaining the most like exact energy, it's more to do an screening. And also the other thing that we tested very quickly was, do we need to use 130,000 structures for the case of the organic molecules? And what you have here is we retrain our model with less data in the training set. So we use only 2,000, and the error that we obtain is 10. And then the more data we include, the more like the less the error is in the test set. So what we obtain is that around 25,000 structures is enough to get all the chemical information that we need from the QM9 data set to build a convolutional neural network using a periodic table descriptor. So if we're able to get 25,000 structures, we can build a descriptor, and we can build a neural network model that predicts the energies. And finally, just very quickly, we also play a bit to find some isomers, and it's exactly what I was saying. We obtain energies that are within 1 or 2 kcals, but we can go and check for few isomers, for example, some that are cyclopentane with alcohol and aldehyde groups, or furan with heterocycles and aldehyde group. And the important thing is we always predict the most stable isomer correctly. And the other thing that's interesting is like the energies are not that off, like the relative energies. However, this kind of approach can be used only for trying to just make, we'll say, a screening, and try to just, it can be seen as more as a not a semi-empirical, but a way to get DFT energies very, very quick, but not to get like the absolute energy down to chemical accuracy. So now, just to finish in the next like 5 minutes, the other thing that we did was to study copper oxide. And the reason why we were studying copper oxide is because my student experimentally, he was studying copper and cuprous oxide. And we have a very, very ambitious project to do something that at the end we were not able to do. But one of the things that we were interested also was to do like neural network models or potentials that were able to perform dynamics and at the same time predict a wide variety of properties, just not just the energy. We wanted to predict the energy of the system, we wanted to predict the valence band, the conduction band, and we also wanted to predict the partial density of states, so it will give us also the total density of states. And in this case, we didn't have a database to take information, so what we did is we grabbed copper oxide and we perform a lot of DFT using VASP metadynamics, and we sampled the chemical space through metadynamics. So we did all the like heavy weight of creating a database that contained a lot of different structures for copper oxide. And we predicted if you read the paper, there is a very nice, we get very good agreement, and we show that we can use this kind of approach to predict not just the energy. But some of the things that I'm very, very interested is when we build a neural network model, we are training it against a data set, something that we have, like, for example, the structure and the DFT or high level energy or property. What we are not sure is like what happens if your model, like when your model is going to fail. And the predictions of neural network models can be unreliable if they go somewhere that is beyond or outside of the training data. And that's very simple to think about if you think about a dynamics. If you are performing a molecular dynamics and you include temperature, your molecule is going to be just exploring different potential energies, like because you are exchanging kinetic and potential energy. So you train your system to describe a certain region, like certain like length. And for example, if you think about the distance between two bonds, if you only have points that are relevant at these positions that you sampled using density functional theory, when you train your neural network, these points are going to be very, very well reproduced. However, if you go outside, you don't know how it's going to be. Like it could be that it describes it properly, but most of the times when you go beyond, you get a very huge like error on those predictions. And this is nothing else that every single analytical chemist has seen. When you do a calibration curve, you calibrate it for a certain range. You never try to make an extrapolation that is very, very far. So there is ways to try to evaluate when your neural network potential goes wrong. And there is a lot in the literature, like some like have a built-in uncertainty. And in our case, we follow the approach of Cortés and Siriano. And the reason why we did that is because you will see in a second what we will want to do in the future. So what Cortés and Siriano did is when you are training your neural network, you are changing the weights and trying to optimize like a loss function. So what you can do is every certain number of steps, you take a snapshot of your neural network potential that is not fully optimized, but you take a snapshot every certain number of steps and you create an ensemble of neural network potentials that are not the best fit, but have information about your system. And what you can do then is when you perform, for example, dynamics, or you try to see if a new molecule that has never been seen by your neural network model will work or not, what you can do is you can evaluate the energies using this ensemble. So you will obtain a huge amount of like energies. Of course, those energies are not a good fit for the true energy that you will obtain if you wait until the loss function is like as low as possible. However, the standard deviation has information about where is it going, if it's going to be predicted correctly or wrong. Because you expect that the standard deviation, it should be, if it's going to be predicted correctly, should be low with respect to this ensemble. And all of this is explained in the paper from Cortés-Siriano. But the nice thing is, if you are below a threshold in this test, you continue using your potential. Everything will be fine. But if not, you automatically switch and perform DFT and prevent that the system crashes. So let me show you the last 3 slides. So let's assume that we perform an MD simulation. And this is with copper oxide. And we are using NBT. The time step is 1 femtosecond. And we are running 500 steps. And we run way longer. And we have this kind of approach and these kind of issues that I will show in a second happen in almost every system that we work with. And what happens is, like, if you start here, you start at 0. This is the relative energy, and you start to get, this is potential energy. So you see that your potential energy start to go up because it's exchanging. And then what happens is, like, you have a very good prediction. The black line is DFT, and the red line is neural network potential prediction. So we are pretty good. We are very, very close. And then there's some discrepancy here. And here in this red line is a 5 millielectron volt standard deviation, and in blue is a 3.5 standard deviation like line. The green line is actually the standard deviation of using this geometry with the ensemble. And then we can see that in all the cases, this standard deviation is below 5. And we use 5 as we try to just test what should be that cutoff. But if we keep running this simulation for maybe, like, for example, 10 nanoseconds, sorry, 10 picoseconds, sorry, nothing happens, everything fluctuates properly, not a problem. If we increase the temperature to 600, everything looks fine, Here, at this point, our standard deviation with respect to the ensemble of neural network potentials shoots up. If at this point, we don't switch to DFT, so after you cross this point at 5 millielectron volts, if you don't switch to DFT, your neural network potential gets completely lost and it crashes. So it will just break bonds, it will get completely like crazy. And the reason is because when you look at the geometry, that geometry that we have at that point is beyond what we included in our training data set. So it's exploring a region of the chemical space that has never been seen by the neural network potential. So the nice thing is then we can just use DFT for certain steps. And when it goes back, we switch back to neural network potential so we don't crash the simulation. And then we go back. So this approach also is very good because you can perform dynamics. You switch between DFT and the neural network potential. And when you finish your dynamics, you have a certain number of DFT calculations that you can reuse to retrain your model. And then you can try to include these regions that were poorly explained before. And of course, if you go to a higher temperature, this goes like even crazier. So it gets like you have to switch between DFT and the neural network potential a lot. And with that, I'm going to conclude and then give you a couple of lines of why we are doing this and where we are going with this. So the main thing is this predictable tensor descriptor with a convolutional neural network is able to work with an arbitrary number of elements. And the nice thing is the periodic table tensor descriptor is invariant with the number of elements that we have. So we can just use it for the whole periodic table, and then we are sure that we can retrain our neural network without having to restart from scratch. And the second thing is, since we are using a convolutional neural network, we reduce the number of weights that we have to optimize, and then the optimization of the model doesn't take a long time. And we tested with a couple of big data sets, and seems to be that that is working. And the second thing, this kind of multitask neural network potential is the idea of it has been there for a long time, that we just don't want to predict only energy. We want to predict the energy, the HOMO, the LUMO, and many other properties or redox potentials, for example, or solvation energies. And we can use this standard deviation of the energies predicted by a snapshot ensemble to be sure when our model is going to, if our model is working correctly, or is going to be exploring a region that is not well trained in the model. So now we have been working on that for more or less 3 years when I still graduated, and all these tools that we have here, my group just completely switched where they want to apply them, because my interest. And mainly, material science is very interesting, but our main focus is to use all these tools, mainly in molecular metal oxides, or polyoxymethylates in some cases, you can call them. That's mainly because we are very, very interested on polyoxyvanadate alkoxides and the redox properties of going from vanadium 5, vanadium 5, vanadium 4, and vanadium 3, and how these species nucleate is fascinating. And trying to get models that are able to explain this nucleation are very important. And using these tools, we can create descriptors that describe polyoxymethylates, including vanadium, molybdenum, tungsten, and other elements. But we don't have to retrain the model if suddenly we want to include iron into the mixture. Then we're also studying a lot low valence actinides. So these are uranium 4, Neptunium 4, and plutonium 4. This is this kind of polyoxymethylates. And again, we are very interested on, for example, pKa's and how this starts to nucleate. And finally, we have these actinide peroxide nanocapsules that we have been working for a long time. And these kind of capsules are perfect because the chemical environment around the atoms is very similar. So what we are pushing here is, can we train our model, our neural network model, with very few building blocks, and then explain the chemistry in the giant polyoxymethylates later. And of course, all of this is more or less where all these things are being applied. And if nothing goes wrong, you should probably see 3 or 4 papers on these lines in the next 6 or 7 months. And with this, I want to thank people in my group. The person that did everything that is now not anymore in my group, that is in postdocing at University of Alberta, is Bala. And from here, almost everyone except Ashen are working on molecular metal oxides, either vanadium polyoxymethylates or uranyl peroxide nanocapsules. And we are using these periodic table descriptors with a convolutional neural network to include, for example, uranium, plutonium. Well, actually, we start with thorium, protactinium, and all the 5 elements. But at the same time, we have all the lanthanides and all the actinides in that model. So if you want to include other molecular metal oxides, we don't have to start from the beginning. And with this, more or less, I will finish. I know it's a bit technical talk, but I will be happy to give more details of anything, or include other parts of my talk.
Bravo, Pere. Thank you very much. Bravo. That was, I think the audience will agree, was an excellent talk. Yeah? And I think it will be. It was just on time, double of time we agreed. Yeah, we agreed 20 minutes, but we almost reached 14. That's great. That's great. Yeah,
sorry.
But, no, I advise you. I hit the button, but I didn't push it. Yeah, because it was so pleasant. So I want to start by saying that the session is being recorded, and also this question session will be recorded, because I think that will be extremely interesting. And I want to say, Pere, that I'm amazed of how our small projects we had in your thesis, during your thesis, has reached that dimension, yeah, and that we are still, seeing so many applications and so many things to do, in this polyoxymethylates materials field, that really we get in love with that, and for many reasons, and it's great. So I have many questions, but I want to open the screen, the session to the audience. So anyone want to raise your hand, switch on your micro, and ask a question. And try to organize. So if you can switch, raise hands and switch on micros. Come on.
So
Mira.
I'm going to comment something. Yeah.
Mariona, okay.
Mariona. Sorry.
No. Okay. Now I wanted to ask you about how do you define your model, your neural network? I mean, which criteria do you use to define the number of nodes, the number of hidden layers? And is this the results are very dependent on the number of hidden layers and on the number of nodes that you choose?
Yeah, it depends. And what we did, I didn't show it here, but originally when we submit the paper, we tested a bit, and then the referee asked us to test way more. But what we did is we test different number of hidden layers, different number of nodes. And what you do is you use this, let me just go back. Let me share my screen again, and then I'm going to, when we, I think it's here, yeah. So when we get our databases and we pull everything out, we use like 10% of it to try to evaluate also these kind of effects. So what we did is like we tried what are the predictions if I use a 20-20, like 20 nodes and 2 hidden layers. What we do 20-20-20, like 3 hidden layers and 20 nodes per layer. What we do only 25 nodes. So we played with all of that, and what we did is we optimized it too. So it's part of the optimization when we construct our model. So we are not just, I go back to the things we got here. So the number of nodes, yeah.
There is a lot of cooking.
It's not
cooking here, yeah.
Yeah, it's not just the weights that we optimize. We also optimize how many nodes do we have here in the hidden layer and how many hidden layers do we have. And as Carlos said, it's a lot of cooking, and it's the kind of thing that more or less we follow like what other people has been doing for like universal descriptors, and we try to be like, or what is recommended, for example, for these symmetry functions. But at the end, we have a gigantic table. I think there is around 30 or 40 entries that test all that, and then we say, well, the cheapest model that gives us the accuracy that we want is this one, and then we use a certain number of like hidden layers and nodes. But of course, it's something that we have to optimize.
Okay.
And I think that's one of it's one of the problems. Is, I mean,
yeah, and the convolutional part is also another kind of trick. Which pattern you choose to convolute to? So,
I have to check it because I don't remember from the top of my head. But I remember we tested a lot of things, and I mean the problem with this approach is like you have the problem with neural networks is that you feed a model, but that model doesn't contain any physical information of the true information. So this kind of like every time that you reduce information, it's like you don't know what you are losing, and that's what's one of our worries. Like it works very well,
but then you could go back in the convolutional. You could go and extract physical meaning there.
We are trying to do that. We are trying to do that, but we are trying to do that with, of course, we are trying to do that with uranyl peroxide nanocapsules and sacs. So what we want to do is to train our polyoxymethylates to compute. Like we let's say that we have sacs and we have a geometry, and what we want to do is train the model to go back from a sacs or give us an idea of what could be the geometry. And it's not easy.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Hey, more questions.
Especially, yeah.
Let's open the session. Yeah, go on. Piero.
Hola, Pere.
Hola, Piero.
Hola.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you very much for this excellent talk and, of course, excellent science behind. I'm completely new to this fascinating field, so my questions are really silly. So the first one is the following, is more a fundamental, at least to me, to understand better the paradigm of neural network. For us as humans, when, for instance, you learn a language, and you have learned a certain fraction of a new language, learning a new piece doesn't mean that you have to restart again, going back to relearn what you have already learned. And so I'm just wondering if neural network is closer to, I mean, our human attitude, or is something in which, for instance, in your database, you had a new element, and then you are forced to retrain the whole set of parameters. Is that so, or?
Yes, I think the issue, if I go, let me just, so the problem is, so let me just go to the next slide really quick. So when you have this neural network, you have to transform like your in this case, we are transforming a geometry into something else. And this something else, for example, is a descriptor. And the descriptors that we are using, the traditional ones are like vectors, like this.
Right.
So the problem is, if you add anything extra here, or anything extra here, you will not have, if you are, for example, let's assume that you train something with only carbon and hydrogen. You construct your vectors, then you train the neural network, and you will have all these weights optimized to give you the optimal result. If you go back and you add extra elements, those weights are missing. So you have to start from scratch. But so that's what the problem of, So, sorry.
No, I mean, I'm just wondering why this is happening. I mean, probably by construction, by definition of the neural network. I mean, you cannot enforce the local nature of some relationship, for instance, because basically if you add nitrogen, I mean, carbon, hydrogen should remain almost the same. So the way that control that particular piece shouldn't change so dramatically.
Let me go back. I think the other problem is when we are using functions that are pairwise.
Right.
So that's the other issue that we have here. So if they were not pairwise, the problem is that you have an interaction, or let's say a chemical environment that, for example, could be carbon, nitrogen.
Right.
That is not there, completely not there. And the problem is, when you build your previous model, you didn't have an input for that section. And that means that it was not connected to the hidden layer with any weights. And if you want to start, you can always add and like prime your neural network with an initial like weights over there and assume that they are 0. That's more or less what we are doing with the other one somehow. But it's a problem of how you construct your descriptor.
Yeah.
So if your descriptor is constructed like the traditional approach that Perler and Parinello were using, the limitation is like every time that you want to restart or add anything, it's not there and has to be start from 0.
It's a pity that a already trained network couldn't be reused, because as Piero is suggesting that these machine learning techniques should allow this kind of progressive learning. So humans are progressively learning from previous knowledge. And actually chemistry is all that.
Yeah. I mean, you can always play tricks like trying to keep like just retraining a part of it, but it's way, I mean, at the end, you have to retrain everything.
Yeah. Isn't there any possibility to establish a sort of perturbation theory to a neural network? Let's suppose that you have trained a neural network, for instance, for copper oxide based on PBE, right? Based on PBE DFT, okay? But then you discover that hybrid functions are essential. For instance, I'm just saying something to, which is probably not true, but, and of course, you don't want to retrain everything, because basically PBE network is giving, PBE train network is giving you, I mean, reasonably, already reasonable results. Isn't that possible to, I mean, instead of retraining to I mean, mathematically, to work out a sort of perturbation of your weight, to reach a state which you know already is not far away from the solution that the network, the neural network has already found. Can you see my point?
Yeah, I see your point, and I don't know. I think I don't think I can answer, because I'm not sure. I mean, we try to do things like the things that we are trying are more in another direction. The thing that we are trying to do is push it away from the training set.
Okay.
But I'm not sure. So one of the things that is true is like, yeah, no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it can be done like that or not. I cannot say.
And if I can, I mean, another more technical question, just a curiosity. Let's suppose that you have developed, like in your case, a neural network capable of doing also forces, right? If you do a standard MD, are the forces conserved? Like, I mean, in a standard, so you have enough continuity in the prediction forces?
Yes, we have, and usually there is, what we do sometimes is we also provide, during the training, we provide the forces as part of the training. And usually, like the issue, I mean, if you are doing simulations within the training set, the set that you use to do the training, everything is conserved, everything. I mean, you have then the problems of which thermostat you're going to use, but everything works perfectly. The issue is more like, as soon as you get a bond length that went way farther away than it should be, everything gets lost. And then you get a force that sometimes it just will pull the atom like to infinity. And then your energy just does weird things and everything crashes. And that's more a problem of how you construct your neural network, what data you use to build it, than more a problem of but yeah, they are conserved and work pretty well.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Pere.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Piero. Questions, Nathan, go.
I have a question here. I raised my hand. So very nice talk.
Sergio, okay.
Yeah, very nice talk. I have a few questions regarding the.
Sorry, Sergio. Let me introduce you, Pere, to you. So Sergio is a PhD student, in Nuria's group.
Okay.
So I have a few questions regarding the switch, because I think that you are sometimes you do a snapshot, then you are calculating the forces via the force field, and then via DFT, and then via the neural network, and then you are comparing the results and checking the standard deviation that you have. But you are taking only one snapshot or a chunk of a snapshot?
No. Let me tell you. So what we do is, when we train our neural network, when we are optimizing the weights, I think it's every 100 optimization steps that we are lowering the loss function, we take the neural network, like in this case, model out. So we take everything out. So what we end is with like maybe 100 or 1,000 neural networks that are not fully like trained, that are still like going towards the training. So then that's our like ensemble. So what we do then is, when we start the simulation, our MD, at every step, we grab the geometry that we have and we obtain the energy with all the neural networks in the ensemble, and we get the standard deviation of the energy in there.
Okay. I
And
misunderstand.
that gives us an idea. Yeah. And that gives, we do it at every step. So what we can do then is like, if we see it drifting or like shooting up, we just stop like using the neural network potential. And we tested many times that in our case, I mean, the threshold that we selected is more or less for, it's system dependent. We choose 5 millielectron volts, but we tested that at every case, if we are around the 5 millielectron volts and the simulation is going to crash and we continue, it crashes all the time. So there is no, like if we don't switch to DFT, it crashes. And of course, we also tried, like after we published the paper, if we retrain the neural network, including data from those points, and we try to just rerun like a fake simulation, like following the same like path, we get way better agreement and we don't have those issues.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Thank you. That's the question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nathan, you go.
Yeah, I see some questions there.
Hello, thank you so much for the talk. It was really interesting to see these methods be applied in such diverse ways. So I think that the second approach with the molecular dynamics was the one that is, let's say, closer to how Bella and Parinello originally envisioned it. So it's very interesting also to see this application extend towards a much larger chemical space using indeed the symmetries from the CNN. So I just have two technical questions about the data sets. So in the first one, is the data set composed of just various types of molecules, or is it also necessary that for each molecule you try out, let's say, some spatial perturbation around a certain vibrational mode, let's say, for example?
Yeah. So we use there are different molecules. So the thing that you are I think implying is what we are doing with like the molecular metal oxides. So what we are doing is, for example, if we are talking about tungsten polyoxymethylates, how we get a data set that contains a huge amount of information, and if we can have only a handful of structures. So what we did is like compute frequencies, harmonic frequencies, and then apply perturbations along the modes and sample the potential energy surface, and then use those like perturbed like structures as part of the training set. But that's a different project. But in the case that I showed today, are different molecules and different materials, so they are not perturbations of. But that's a very valid way to get more information, especially if you are going to perform dynamics. Apply perturbations to sample the potential energy surface is the way to go to prevent your system going away when you perform dynamics from what you train.
But in the application that you showed in the first part, could you get away just using the minimums, or you need more sampling? Oh, so it's
you can get away with the minimum, but the problem is if you try to perform dynamics, we tried also, but we didn't explore it much. You need more information. You need you have only the minimas, and if you perform a simulation maybe at 50 Kelvin or very low temperature, there is not a lot of like distortion of the geometry, you can still get away with it. However, I mean, that kind of like the structures that you sample, if you perform a simulation at very low temperature, is not that relevant. So, but if we want to do real simulations, we need some, at least in our case, we need more information from the potential energy surface.
For sure, and I think there then we get more into the second part. So I was kind of curious, and this question kind of builds off of what Sergio was also asking, is so you have a methodology for finding sections where you need to switch from the neural network potential to the DFT, and later on you then extract these to retrain. But what kind of criteria do you use when extracting this, both temporally, because of course a lot of these systems are correlated, and maybe even spatially? I don't know how large your system is, if you need to cut.
So in this case, the system is pretty small because we are talking about copper oxide. So we have like very few atoms in the unit cell. And it was more like a test case to see, okay, we implement this and we can move to So what we do is, at any given point, we compute the standard deviation with the. Let me just go back here, and I think will be easier to see.
With the ensemble technique, yes.
Yeah. So let me share my screen.
But so yeah, one could indeed take from the whole region that you then find the high standard deviation. You could take all of the points, but I guess you would have a bit too much information.
Yeah, you're right. So the idea is how many of these snapshots and how frequent is another parameter that we have to just play. And I think we went with the same thing that they were suggesting in their paper. But then at every given point, we compute all these energies.
Yeah.
At every given point. So, and then what happens here is like you are still changing the geometry using DFT. And at some point when your geometry predicts the neural network potential is an energy or a standard deviation that is lower, we just switch to the other one. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
But then this full region that you have, that is here shaded, you then fully incorporate the data to retrain.
Well,
or you do not filter
later on. You don't retrain on the fly. So
yes,
let me just to be sure, like
yeah,
you got this data, and of course this is a short simulation. If you do a longer simulation, I mean it's tricky because of course your DFT calculations are going to be more expensive computationally, and you have to be careful that it's not going to be like a forever simulation that is going to be using DFT all the time. But what you can do is you simulate, you be switching, and then again, when you finish the simulation, you can just go visually and see like what happens to this geometry. And sometimes it's obvious. You see a movement that a bond is being elongated, and then you can check like, okay, the distance between copper and oxygen has gone into a region that has never been seen in our training and in our metadynamics that we use for the training. And then that means that, okay, we run more metadynamics to get more data in that region, or we can reuse this data. But of course, we have to be sure that we're including enough data, because then is a balance between if we're including only few structures, they are going to be weight, like their weight on the total number of structures will be very low, and it could be that we don't feed them properly. So this is more like, I think maybe it's my opinion, but it's like almost like an art.
No, it's not. It's a kind of art, yes. It's a kind of art nowadays. As conversing an SCF, for calculation was 30 years ago. Same problem, yeah. But I mean that this kind of willing to include temperature. So actually, you are completely changing your energy surface. Yeah. And I think it's absolutely clear that it will fail. You cannot describe a system at 3000 in the same free energy per surface as the same system at 6,7.
Yeah.
No? It's not the same chemistry happening there.
But but if you are able to sample like what I think is Nathan was saying, if you are able to sample the normal modes and actually include like potential energy surface like data in your training, so what you are doing is nothing else than more or less fitting a potential. And if you fit high enough, like let's say if it's harmonic, you should be able to do simulations at a certain temperature. And what we're interested in is, for example, in our case, is to run simulations to do, for example, how geometry changes impact, for example, properties like redox potentials, solvation energies, the nucleation pathways. And we have, the nucleation pathways, we're still very far to get something. But for example, for redox potentials, if you change the geometry of actinides, you change the redox potential. How far is the water? How far is an OH coordinated? You change the redox potential. And the pKa, for example.
Okay, there was a question from Mariano Curti in the chat. Mariano, are you there?
He has no microphone.
So
no microphone, so I can read it. So in many processes involving materials, interesting stuff happens when symmetry is lost. Defects, surfaces, doping, etc. Are you planning to tackle this kind of system using machine learning? Are you aware of any group doing so?
When this student Bala joined my group, that was the plan. So our plan was, okay, we are going to study not copper oxide, we are going to study surfaces. We are going to do the 111, we are going to do different surfaces. Then we are going to try to include small molecule that absorb into the surface, defects, and try to build like a neural network that is able to predict energetics, just to try to get to play with that and see if we are able to say something meaningful. In his case, was doing water oxidation. The problem is like it was bigger than we were able to chew, especially in 3 years and a shared student experimentally. And I think you're spot on. I think it's a very interesting, very awesome way to go. And I think it's not trivial. It's not trivial, but yeah, it's exactly, we didn't try. And I think probably someone is working on that, but we had to abandon it because it was bigger than we can do. It was not able to do it. At least with half a student for 3 years, it was hard.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah,
Of course.
Again, a more operative one. When I want to use a standard, let's say, quantum mechanical program, I just download the program, install it, and then I'm repeating the same calculation that somebody else in the world has already run, getting the same number. This is basically science, science definition.
This is going to be a very good question.
Yeah. But now let's suppose that I would like to use your neural network for copper oxide, and you agree to help me or to allow me to use it. I mean, what technically I have to do? So what I have to download, what I have to set up in my environment in order to, I mean, to get exactly the same results from your lab.
So, yeah. So what we did, and probably Carlos is going to probably kill me for that. We put everything, all the data, including the neural network potential, the geometry, everything in a Figshare. So it's everything is in a repository.
Figshare? You said Figshare? Okay. Continue.
It should. It's not the. Let me try to save my from a beating. It's not the best repository, and I think it's not useful if you don't know what you are doing. So if you want to do it on your own, it's going to be hard because it's like how we structure the data in that like big giant like compressed file. You may not find what you search, and it will be very hard. I think in that case, if you want to use it, we will help. We are absolutely willing to help. But I think there is other tools, and Carlos probably is in there, that are trying to just help people like structure the data in a way that makes you can reuse it easily. In our case, I mean, we put it in Figshare mainly because it was like, we need to publish, and it was requested by the referee. So it's like, okay, you have to put it somewhere. And we put it in our, yeah.
At the end, I think what Pere is asking is how we could manage on that. And so the codes actually, Pere, are Python codes.
Yeah.
Simple Python notebooks, actually really short, not very long lines. All of them use TensorFlow from Google and other high-level libraries. So Python is, okay, this the code you use to train the network is actually not the code that you will need to take profit of the network. Like at the very end, what we want is to have this kind of force fields, yeah, available to do chemistry, yeah, right, Piero?
Yeah,
exactly. I'm not interested in the stage.
Right. Also, we're interested in the force field.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
and then the question is, okay, so using the force field is embedded within this Python code to train the network. Because this is when at that moment you have all the matrices, or you have all the coefficients, or have all that stuff. Yeah. Yeah. And so this training codes has to be a little bit modified to be distributed or made it available as production codes for community. if they want really to be of some commodity use, yeah. And then
I
the
think
other,
that's so.
yeah, and then the other problem is yeah, to make this available in a, and the other question that I don't know, and that this is the question I would like really to ask Pere also, is cheaper? So or say how much expensive is to cross the network and get the energy?
So let me say two things. Like the first to answer Piero. So I think at some point we are going to start to see groups like providing a neural network for a set of, like the same thing that you think about force fields.
That would
like,
be a
or
web server.
TMs.
That would be a web server providing a,
Yeah.
what it means to provide a neural network.
Yeah.
With Piero,
It will be, I mean,
with Piero, we know what this is. Okay, and we started there, Pere. And now we are on GitHub, okay, but we okay.
What I mean is, like, at some point you should be able to use it in either implemented in a software, or it will be provided everything to use, like upload your geometry, upload your data package somewhere, and it will be processed. And I think that's what is going. I think that the problem is like how these tools or sites are going to look like. That's the thing that is important now. And the second thing, it's not.
There are companies already trying to exploit this, you know. Yeah.
And I think what you said, Carlos, is not cheaper. It's not cheaper because you need high quality data. So that's the main issue. Like if you want to do like facial recognition with machine learning, you just need pictures. There is many pictures. It's easy to get thousands of pictures of different faces, different people. What I want to say is, like, there is cases that is not cheaper, but is better. Like one example is if you talk about transuranics or like actinides, there is no semi-empiricals. The force fields that we have are like not so good. And there is a lot of problems associated with them. But if you want to do any dynamics, you don't have anything to do. And try to do a force field that is only for for one case is a bit using it. I mean, force fields don't have the accuracy and they are not able to predict high level data. In this case, if we train a neural network, we should be able to predict the energy accurately with changes of geometry. We can predict properties. And then the problem is that how transferable they are. And I think the transferability is another issue that we are very worried. So if we train certain chemical environments, can we study other molecules that are not in the data set that have similar data, like similar environments? And I think the answer is no, because it's like the transferability is very poor in some cases. But I think that these are the challenges that we have nowadays. Like it's amazing. It's a good. I mean, everyone is using machine learning nowadays. It seems to be, but there is a lot of very good questions that are still there, and they are not easy.
No, but I mean that there are some people that are setting up this kind of databases, especially to train neural networks, and that everyone is using the same inputs, yeah, to try to get the neurons trained. But also, I think that there is the need to get the community interested in using, those new force fields, a possibility to, if there are any that can be put open to the community. Because this is the other point. These are precious results nowadays. Having a very good force field train these levels as you are, as we see many examples, so many examples around the world, as such levels of accuracy. It's really, ambitious. It's precious. So we know that everyone may have some economic. So the community is open. I think the community is willing to have the possibility, at least to train, not to train, to use in real chemistry, in other real chemistry problems we're interested in, those new technologies. But okay, new people that they are developing them.
I think one of the problems that we can have with these kind of approaches that Carlos is mentioning is like you have databases that are things that are known, and you are using them to fit a neural network potential or a model that is going to predict things near those known structures. The problem is if you have a new chemistry or a new compound that is significantly different, you may be missing it when you do kind of exploratory works with these kind of approaches. So they are very good for completeness, to find, like if you have a niche or a certain like kind of like compounds and you have almost everything that, and to optimize specific like property within a set of parameters. So the problem is, it's a bit dangerous that we can be missing very interesting chemistry that has not been like trained or learned by your model.
We were saying this 30 years ago with the QCell methods. Yeah. But now we are 3 orders of magnitude further, so we can expect. And then there are machine learning or artificial intelligence methods that learn and learn to play. Yeah. So.
No, I was referring more like if you are going to use it, like the approaches that we are using, that's one of the major flaws in our, like what we are developing right now. It's like if you want to study a completely new chemistry, and that's the problem with nucleation. If you want to study nucleation, well, you want to study the full nucleation. If you do it at DFT level or ab initio, why you have to study with a neural network? You want to try to predict things that are bigger. Then
where to do
there is where you have like where you have the problem.
When to do that and together. Any other question from the audience? Pere agreed to stay till 4:30, so still we have more than a quarter to disturb his peaceful life in Dakota.
Yeah, if you have to ask any other questions regarding, I don't know, if you have questions about like what is to be an assistant professor or starting your group, I will be happy to try to answer. But I don't know, it's also new to me. So
how to get a green card after?
Yeah, no, it's I got a green card, so not citizenship, but I got a green card. But yeah.
More questions? Well, online sessions are tiring in any case.
Yeah. I mean, and I think it's very...
Now we will have so nice time, no? Sharing a coffee outside, no? After the talk and discussing. But okay, so here online, I see that it's tough, no?
Try to think. I think the last talk I gave to ICIQ was 20.
Was in Tarragona, yeah. We came in Tarragona, yeah, in the library.
2014. Yeah, that's what I was telling to Nuria Vendré also, that I come from an ICIQ that doesn't exist anymore. They didn't have this fancy building, new building that you had. So that wasn't the library. That was the seminar room when I was there. So, so for me, it's a very, like, it's a library. Yeah, well, that's like it changed a lot from the initial years. So to like.
You remember when you arrived there? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was like.
Yeah, Pere was one of the founders. Yeah. See.
Yeah, I arrived like I think 6 months after, where like everyone was already there, but yeah, still like, but it was, I think it felt way different. I think everything was still being learned, even by the institution, like how everything was working, everything was being like developed. And of course you meet a bunch of people that come.
It was a so wonderful time that since I think that we'll maybe can start talking, opening in maybe another ways, and there are no more scientific questions, I will stop recording. Okay.
That's a good idea.